Welcome to the Business of Government Hour TV, a video companion to our flagship radio program. I'm Michael Keegan, your host. Each week, government executives and thought leaders join me for an informative, insightful, and in-depth conversation on improving government and its effectiveness. These individuals are truly changing the way government does business. What are the U.S. federal government's management priorities? And how is the administration tackling human capital challenges? I'll explore these questions and so much more with Margaret Weichert, Deputy Director for Management at the Office of Management and Budget. My co-host from IBM is Andrew Fairbanks. Take a look and take a listen. Download the entire interview at iTunes, Podcast One, and at businessofgovernment.org. What are your duties and responsibilities as Deputy Director of Management? And perhaps you could tell us about your portfolio and what fits in it.
Sure. So I lead the M side, so the management side of OMB, and that includes the Office of Federal Procurement Policy, where we just got a new administrator, Senate-confirmed administrator today, started. We have the Office of Federal Financial Management, which is led by the Federal Controller, and we're looking to fill that role, which is also a Senate-confirmed role. We have the Office of the Federal CIO, Suzette Kent, and a team that focuses on technology and government. And last but not least, we have two additional organizations. One is the U.S. Digital Service, which does the sort of IT firefighting for government. And then we also have the Office of Performance and Personnel Management, which focuses on performance policy, measurement in government, strategy, as well as all of the personnel and HR policy.
What are some of the top management challenges or challenges that you're facing, and how have you sought to address those challenges?
So the biggest challenge that runs through all of the activities that I've looked at in both of my roles relates to a siloed orientation and a very function-specific orientation. And so there are silos between agencies that have lots of opportunity for optimization, and I think a lot of deputy directors for management before me have looked at optimization across agencies. The thing I think I've seen the most need for additional focus is functional silos. And what I mean by that is IT modernization, everyone knows, is a major priority in government. A lot of folks, though, didn't realize how interconnected the issues were around how do you actually find the financing for your IT modernization problems. So OFFN and our financial working capital orientation is a critical part of getting IT projects off the ground. People are another critical issue where IT modernization has run aground because we didn't have the right people with the right skills to meet the mission needs, or we weren't able to move them around agilely enough. And so it's really the integration across functions. Procurement is another thing. We spend one of our biggest line items in our contracting pool is people. So hiring people to fit very niche skills in government or having augmentation of skills, that's something that procurement brings to the table. Mm-hmm. So that's a place where pulling all those threads together and focusing on IT, focusing on what we need to do with data, and focusing on what we need to do with people, pull together as three drivers we have to look at in concert.
So, Margaret, I'd like to take some time to kind of get a sense of the administration's long-term strategic vision for modernizing and transforming the federal government, to do something that you alluded to earlier, which is to improve the agency's abilities to deliver on mission outcomes, to provide excellent service to the American people, and to be, I think you used the term, effective stewards. So what is that vision? And perhaps it's sort of an overview of the PMA of sorts.
So when we started thinking about the vision for modernization in the 21st century, we started with a view of our customers and the citizens we're serving and the services we're trying to provide. And we looked at what are they expecting us to do, and do they think we're doing a good job? And trust in government is at an all-time low. And we wanted to look at the elements of that and get a fact base to say, what aren't we doing that the American people expect us to be doing? And we looked at specific functions and we said, where do Americans think we're doing a good job and where are we failing and how might we address those things? And fundamentally, the places where we're failing relate to service delivery and relate to how we are able to move and change and adapt according to the different desires and policy objectives. And so what the root causes underneath why we're not very adaptable is we effectively institutionalized how we do government around a business model that was about fighting the Cold War. Yeah. And many of the actual vehicles that we use in government date to the 50s, 60s, 70s, where the paradigm was about a constant sort of adversary and a relatively stable environment in which you would operate. And so there weren't the notions of what the jobs are changing every few years. Many of the jobs we can't fill today, nobody could have conceived of even 10 years ago, let alone 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. How we think about acquisition in a world where we have online marketplaces that provide you real-time information about both prices of new activity or new purchases as well as aftermarket for all of those same things. Our procurement policies effectively were trying to create fairness in a world without markets. In a world with markets and visible, always on, real-time global markets, the notions of fairness are different. Same thing with equity in pay. In order to figure out what the market fair pay for a specific role was, 60 years ago, there were all these processes put in place. Today you go to Glassdoor, you Google it, you can figure out what a fair compensation package is. And so in that environment, there's a whole lot that the American people are expecting that would be different, and we need to meet those expectations.
You mentioned IT modernization as one of those top 3 priorities. I'd love to hear a little bit more about the types of changes you're addressing, particularly with all the recent focus on security, data privacy, recent breaches, high-profile breaches. What are some of the changes you're trying to drive into how the government procures and manages IT systems?
So we started with the IT modernization plan at the beginning of the administration, which was a list of 52 very near-term activities that we needed to essentially just ensure a baseline for cybersecurity and basic IT hygiene. We completed all those on time before the requisite date, so that was kicked off in 2017 and completed by the end of 2018. Following on from that, a broader strategy set that includes our cloud strategy, cloud migration, strategies around sharing quality services, strategies around data and how we think about data, how we think about data centers, as well as a number of other vehicles that we've put in place to help execute on this, things like the Centers of Excellence, things like the Technology Modernization Fund, and the probably more important Managing Government Technology Act facilities around getting working capital funds up and running. There's still some technical fixes needed to get more agencies able to take advantage of that, but those are things that we've been running down with a goal to really ensuring that we're well positioned to pursue IT modernization.
As we move into the IT modernization, I know another area that agencies are focusing on is how they tap into the vast amount of data that's available to them to really use it as a strategic asset to drive more effective government and more transparent government. What's the status of the cross-agency priority goal around leveraging data as a strategic asset?
So you'll be pleased to know that we announced the data strategy about a month ago, I think. And it included a broad vision for what we need to do in government around data. And it includes the starting point around data governance and coincidentally, the timing around the establishment of Chief Data Officers Council has just come online. We've just passed the deadline for designation of participants in that council, and we're working to stand that up. So governance is a key element around data, and not only will the council facilitate activities across agencies, but I think most people in figuring out who they want to designate as chief data officers have realized that the question of data needs to include many people within an agency, from the financial management office, from the personnel office, from the procurement office, as well as from the statistical and evidence perspective, and then definitely in the IT realm, data and data structure and how we actually tag data, the hygiene of data, metadata is an important part of the IT investments we need to make. So that's another part of the strategy. And it's only when you've got those in place that you can really go to the place everybody wants to go, which is around using the data, whether it's through AI or advanced analytics, and then ultimately to commercialization of data. So we have a lot of investment in basically structuring our data and ensuring that it's well positioned to both do the work we need it to do for us in the 21st century, but also to commercialize it and make it available more broadly.
The other thing you're working on is taking some recognition for folks that make the government work. And I'd like to transition to an initiative you started, the Gears of Government Awards. Would you tell us more about this, but particularly how does this process identify and highlight the less seen positions that keep government going?
So I'm really excited about this program, and we wanted it to really leverage the gear analogy that we use broadly in the president's management agenda, but more importantly, the heart and soul of how things actually work in government often includes people who are not in the frontline mission, but are in mission support activities that make it possible for the astronauts to go into space, make it possible for the firefighters to get where they need to go. Nobody thinks about all of the IT systems that help us use AI to figure out where fires might be, or look at endangered species and look at weather patterns that NOAA provides to identify how changing temperatures in the water might affect endangered species. So recognizing people who are doing great things with IT, with data, with people, with procurement is something that is really, really powerful, because many more people are focused on those types of tasks, and they're not going to be the doctor that wins the Nobel Prize. They're not going to be the person that, is front and center fighting the fire, but they are absolutely critical to the life of that mission and its success.
So I want to get back to your Office of Personnel Management hat here for a second. Interested in hearing more about what you see as the key workforce and human capital management challenges that are facing the federal government today.
Well, I'm actually going to start in my DDM hat, because the people gear is the critical pivotal gear that has actually affected our ability to modernize.
Interesting.
And so a lot of the proposals around the workforce actually start with that notion of getting the right people in the right roles at the right time to do the mission and create the service and stewardship opportunities for government. And what was really clear when looking at our people mission is how deeply aligned it was to a very old set of realities. And so everything from how we hire into very narrowly defined jobs to how we do performance management and reward people for the work they're doing, and then ultimately how do we move people around and ensure they have the skills to respond to changes in the environment. all of those things were tied up in very old paradigms that were not flexible enough, not dynamic enough for the 21st century. The gig economy, the notion of reskilling, the notion of workforce of the future, all of these things are changing at just an amazing pace. What I do today and what I would expect to be doing even 3 years from now should not be the same because the missions are changing that fast. And yet we don't have the disciplines in government or the processes or the capabilities, starting with the legislation, but all the way down to the technologies we rely on to move at the speed of the 21st century. So rooted in all of that is strategic human capital management requires us answering these very profound questions about how do we get the right people in the right jobs at the right time to do mission service and stewardship. And so we focused on three main things: hiring and bringing people into government, performance management. How do we actually reward performance based on merit versus, a peanut butter approach that's sort of one size fits all, and it doesn't matter if you're an absolute star, curing cancer, or you're essentially phoning it in. You get more or less the same reward at the end of the day. And then last but certainly not least, how do we move people around government so that we can cross-pollinate and get the right skills aligned for the 21st century jobs?
What are some of the specific programs and approaches that you're taking to try to address those challenges? I think I'm most interested in the last one you mentioned, actually, seeing how much commonality there actually is across agencies and the challenges they face. How do you drive that increased agility in terms of where people work?
So we needed to start with what were some of the challenges to it. And I think one of the biggest challenges to agility was the notion that if you move people, they would not be set up for success, or that moving people was some other form of a policy consideration. For example, there's a lot of concern about making sure you have good employment opportunities in a geography, which is an absolutely important thing. It's something that we care about and Congress cares about. What we really need to do is to look at what are the actual skills and jobs and not equate today's jobs with what is possible in the future. And very often things like automation have gotten stopped because people fear what will happen to jobs, but they never go to the next step and say, how do we ensure that those same people have good jobs? And we apply a training lens, we apply a skills lens to those people. And so there's a combination of activities that we're taking on to look at robotic process automation that frees up some time and energy, and then reallocation, reskilling, upskilling, so that people have more of the skills we need in the 21st century. We have huge gaps in hiring and can't find enough people to do many of our cybersecurity jobs, IT jobs, law enforcement jobs. If I automate and create some efficiencies there, bring those very same people who, by the way, already have background investigations, already have been vetted, we already know that they work here and want to work here. Good business practice says it's always cheaper to retrain than to hire from without. It always costs more to hire from without. And so we're doing things like the Cyber Reskilling Academy, where we've done 2 pilot cohorts. 50 people going through these trainings is just a drop in the bucket on what we actually need to do. But we've had overwhelming interest, overwhelming success. And the first cohort was wonderful because we took people from a range of grades, from grade 5, I think, up to grade 13. And none of the first cohort were in straight-up IT jobs before. And we did an aptitude test, and the people who qualified performed better than any other group worldwide who had ever participated in this program. Wow. So our feds did an outstanding job, and we proved what I had hoped we would prove, which was you can take people, whether they're in a procurement job or they're in an admin job or they're doing a processing job, and you can give them new skills that allow them to be part of our cyber defense capability. So we want to do more of that. We're looking for other important skills areas where we can do similar type programs, and we're working this year with agencies to essentially scale that so agencies themselves can take on a lot of that with their training dollars.
Right. You're going to need to go outside, obviously, to get folks in who have the right skills. But where I'm going with this is what's happening around expediting or expanding, rather, the new direct hiring authorities. What are these where are they being used, and what's the plan to expand them further?
So we announced a number of direct hire authorities over the last 12 months around STEM and IT. I think a lot of the very specific elements around cyber have been well known for a while. I think it's interesting, even when we provide those direct hire authorities, they're not, sort of picked up and used in great quantity. I think because the more different paths in we have the challenge of suboptimizing our pipelines in. And so one of the things that we're working on, even in tandem with the direct hire authorities, is there's actually a pilot that we've been working on at OPM along with the U.S. Digital Service to look at new ways of even how we do our competitive hiring to ensure that we're doing appropriate vetting, but getting the most qualified people in the pipeline and not getting overwhelmed with sort of minimal qualifications that really aren't likely to rise to the top of the pile. So we're looking at some process improvements. We're looking at some technology assistance in that realm, and have had some pretty good outcomes, we think, that help keep things in the competitive hiring realm as well. Obviously, if you're looking for a real niche, economist or other STEM career, the direct hiring authorities have been designed to help with that as well.
So, Margaret, what advice would you give someone who's thinking about a career in public service?
I think start with something, a challenge or a question that really motivates you. What do you see from where you sit that you could add value to your country? I really feel like this was a call to service, and I had never really thought about. I'm a bit of a klutz, so I never really thought I would serve in the military. And when I was asked to serve with skills around management, it had never occurred to me, and it's been a profound privilege to work on the issues that I'm working on, and I feel like those are the skills that I have, and maybe the skills that are most important from the private sector are the belief that it's possible you can get to a solution. There's always a way to think through the opportunity, and then to not feel that technology or people or finance can be a barrier, but that those could be enablers to that possibility.
Be sure to join me next time on the Business of Government Hour TV for another informative, insightful, and in-depth conversation exploring the intersection of government, technology, and leadership. Until then, it's businessofgovernment.org.